Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Cappuccinos, Cupcakes, and a Corpse, a Cape Bay Café mystery, by Harper Lin. Narrated by Marguerite Gavin. Chapter 1. I was bent over a cappuccino, carefully moving my milk pitcher to etch a design into the foam, when Mrs. D'Angelo burst into the cafe. "Francesca!" she exclaimed so loudly that I jumped, pouring milk across the center of my design and out onto the saucer and counter. I sighed and put down the milk pitcher, then plastered on a huge smile before looking up at her. "Mrs. D'Angelo." I tried to sound happy despite having ruined my almost finished cappuccino. "Francesca," she said again, coming around the counter. She grabbed my hands. "How are you, dear? Oh, you poor thing. I've been so worried about you." She put one hand on my cheek, still managing to grasp both of mine in her other hand. She was exceptionally strong for an older woman. "You precious dear." I tried to keep the happy look on my face as I took half a step back, but some glimmer of distress must have flickered through my eyes because Mrs. D'Angelo pulled me into a tight hug. No, you dear girl, you come here." She held me in such a way that my hands were pinned up by my shoulders, as if I had been raising them in surrender when she moved in. I patted the woman's shoulders feebly with the slight range of motion I had in my wrists. "You don't have to be strong, Francesca, you don't have to be strong," she murmured. At that moment, I wished I was strong enough to break away from her grip. I caught the eye of one of my employees coming out of the back room and sent her a "help me" message with my eyes. "Mrs. D'Angelo, is that you?" Sammy asked, putting her hand lightly on Mrs. D'Angelo's back. Mrs. D'Angelo mercifully let me go and turned her fountain of emotion in Sammy's direction. "Oh, Samantha." She put one hand on Sammy's upper arm and her left one gripped mine. Her long red fingernails dug enthusiastically into our flesh. She looked between the two of us. "Samantha, I'm so glad Francesca here has you to help her through this difficult time. She needs good friends like you now more than ever." She rubbed my arm as she spoke, a welcome relief from her talon-like grasp. "I'm doing all I can to help her out." Sammy smiled at the older woman. "I'm sure you are, dear," Mrs. D'Angelo cooed. She turned back to me. "Do you need anything else? If there's anything you need, you know you can come to me or to any of us in the Ladies' Auxiliary, and we'll do absolutely whatever we can to help you. We owe it to your dear mother's memory, God rest her soul, to help her dear Francesca." Mrs. D'Angelo crossed herself reflexively as she referred to my mother, releasing Sammy in the process. Sammy took advantage of the freedom and stepped quickly over to the register, where customers were getting impatient, leaving me to deal with Mrs. D'Angelo and her monologue and grasping hands. I gave Sammy a look, and she smiled at me. She'd hear about it later, that was for sure. But for now, she was the lucky one getting back to work. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the tourist whose cappuccino I had been working on when Mrs. D'Angelo rushed in, impatiently tapping his fingers on the marble-top table where he was sitting. I looked helplessly at him, then back at his cappuccino. "Mrs. D'Angelo, Now, dear," she went on, oblivious to the fact that I was trying to escape. "No objections. None of us would have it any other way. Anything for our dear Carmela's daughter. Now, what time is it?" She looked at her watch. "Oh, heavens, I didn't even realize. I'm due at the library for our genealogy society meeting. I have to run." She hurried back around the counter toward the door. "Now, don't forget what I said, Francesca dear. Anything you need." And she was gone, in as much of a whirlwind as she'd arrived, leaving only a cloud of her floral perfume and some red fingernail prints in our arms. I sighed as I began a fresh cappuccino for the man who was still waiting impatiently for his drink. Not that I could blame him. "I need a nap after that," I whispered to Sammy as we moved around each other in the small drink prep area. "That woman has more energy in her 70s than I've had my entire life." Sammy giggled. "I think she gets it from exhausting other people." I bent over the steaming cappuccino, carefully crafting a rose in the foam. I tried not to rush, but I could feel the man's eyes boring into the top of my skull as I worked. I finally put down the milk pitcher and stood back to assess my handiwork. Certainly not my best, but it was still better than a person could find anywhere else in town. or in most places on the Massachusetts coast. I picked up the mug and saucer and carefully walked them around the counter to the man who had ordered the drink. I set it gently on the table in front of him, positioned perfectly so he'd have the best view of my creation. "So sorry about the wait, sir. My apologies." I gave him my very best cafe owner smile.
"I hope it don't always take this long,"
he grunted. He took a drink without even glancing at the rose I'd crafted. I smiled sweetly. "I really am very sorry, sir." Rude. I turned to go back around the counter. I should have known that when I saw the Yankees jersey. Despite living in New York City for years before moving home, I've always been a Massachusetts girl at heart. And during baseball season, I bleed Boston Red Sox red. Well, I suppose everyone bleeds red, but that just shows how much better the Red Sox are than our rivals to the south. No one literally bleeds Yankee blue. I took up my post in front of the espresso machine, wiping things down while I waited for the next order. Sammy worked the cash register and called out the next drinks to make just seconds later. "I need 2 lattes, please." I set about making the drinks, brainstorming what I would design in their foam as I worked. I steamed the milk for the first drink, getting it about halfway finished before I pulled the espresso. The timing had to be perfect or the espresso would get bitter. Fortunately, I'd been making cappuccinos since I could see over the counter, so it was second nature to me. I decided on coordinating sun and starburst patterns. I made the sun design first, pouring the center circle of foam, then using a toothpick to draw out the rays. Finishing that, I moved on to the starburst. Work, except for Mrs. D'Angelo's interruption, was a cherished distraction from the circumstances that had brought me back to my hometown on the Massachusetts coast. This cafe had been in my family for 3 generations. First, it had belonged to my grandparents, who opened it shortly after arriving from Italy almost 70 years ago. My mother grew up here, making coffee and cannoli alongside her parents. It was her sanctuary when her marriage fell apart, and she needed a way to support herself and her young daughter. Now it's my sanctuary. Like a lot of people who grew up in this town, I left for college and didn't come back. Not for a long time, anyway. I went to school in Boston and got a job working in public relations in New York. The hours were long and the competition was fierce. I was happy at first, but it wore on me over time. I managed to carve out a personal life in what little free time I had, dating and getting engaged to a guy I thought was the man of my dreams. Thought being the key word. He broke my heart, removing his things from the apartment we shared, the apartment I couldn't afford on my own, and running off with a girl from his office. I'd cried for days, pulling it together just enough to go to work, then coming home and crying some more while I packed up my own things so I could move into a new apartment when I found one. I spent hours on the phone with my mother. "Francesca, come home," she'd say and tell me how the cafe had saved her when she'd been in my position so many years ago. But I didn't listen. I stayed in New York to fight for what was left of my life. And then my mother died. I quit my job, broke my lease, and moved back to the Massachusetts coast. I buried my mother, moved into the house where my grandparents had raised my mother and me, and stepped back behind the counter at Antonia's Italian Café as if I had never left. So there I was, 2 weeks later, back in the place where I'd spent the better part of my 34 years, creating intricate designs in the artisan cappuccinos our cafe had always specialized in. It wasn't a terribly big place, just 10 two-top tables along the exposed brick walls, and 10 oversized armchairs arranged in groups and nestled into cozy corners. All the tables and chairs were mismatched because my grandparents hadn't been able to afford coordinating furniture when they first opened the cafe. My grandmother had frequented estate sales and auctions, picking up 1 table or chair at a time until the space was full. They're pretty old, but my mother had maintained them by reupholstering any that needed rejuvenating. It was an eclectic mix, but it gave off a surprisingly cozy, homey feel. Compared to Antonia's, the stylish coffee shops I'd visited in New York seemed sterile and severe. And of course the burnt dirt water they served and tried to call coffee was even worse than it sounded when compared to the drinks my family proudly made. Don't get me wrong, plenty of little family-owned diners in New York can make a great cup of coffee, but when you get into the espresso drinks the fancier places tried to serve, That was when you got bilge water. My grandparents would roll over in their graves if I ever even thought about bringing in pre-roasted beans, let alone pre-ground ones. That was part of the magic of Antonia's. We did everything, from start to finish. Our milk even came from local dairy farms. Our coffee wasn't the only thing that kept people coming in. We served some food, mostly desserts and sandwiches, but it was really the way we catered to our customers that kept us busy. The cafe was popular with book clubs, partly because of our coffee, partly because of the comfortable chairs, and partly because we let them drag the tables and chairs around however they wanted. As long as they bought something and didn't violate fire code, we were more than happy to accommodate them. My mother had even encouraged them to place their orders ahead of time so we could have everything ready when they came in. Even without the book clubs, we stayed busy, especially during the summer tourist season. I finished the second drink and passed them to Sammy to deliver to the customer's table. Finally, I got a moment to catch my breath. As Mrs. D'Angelo had said, Sammy really had been a lifesaver since my arrival back in Cape Bay. She had worked alongside my mother for years, since Sammy was in high school, actually, and she knew the cafe like the back of her hand. In my first few days back, she had helped me learn the new cash register, taught me the stocking and ordering procedures, and generally followed me to make sure I didn't make a mess of things. Now I relied on her the same way my mother had, working side by side to keep the cafe humming along smoothly. We had some part-time help from a couple of teenagers out of school for summer vacation, but the two of us, plus our 2 bakers, carried the bulk of the load, and it was going great. Except, of course, when someone came along and started talking about my mother. At those times, the reality and freshness of her death hit me, and focusing on my work became infinitely harder. "I'm going to take a break," I told Sammy as she came back around the corner. She looked at me, her eyebrows drawn together. "Are you okay?" I usually took a lunch break and not much else, so this was unusual. "Yeah, I just need to get some air." I pulled off the apron I wore to protect my sleek black clothing, which was the uniform of the New York City public relations world, as I stepped into the back room. Outside, I took a deep breath. We were in town, but the tang of the salt air was still strong. It felt good in my lungs. It was the smell of my home and childhood. It made me happy to be back and nostalgic for what I had lost. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the cafe's brick wall. I must have been out there longer than I thought, because the next thing I knew, Sammy poked her head out the door. "Francesca?" she called quietly. "Hmm?" I murmured, my eyes still closed. "Why don't you get out of here? You've been working nonstop since you got back. You deserve some time off." I'd been in the cafe from open to close since the day after my mother's funeral, but that was the way I wanted it. If I stayed busy enough, I couldn't think. I can't leave you here alone." "I won't be alone. I already called Becky to come in. You need the rest." I opened my eyes and looked at her. She had one hand on her hip and was holding the door open with the other. Wisps of her long blonde hair had escaped the low ponytail she always wore at work and were swirling around her head in the breeze. Despite the golden halo effect her hair was giving her, she had a stern expression to go with her assertive posture. She didn't look as if she would take no for an answer. I sighed and looked at my watch. 3 hours to close. Going home now wouldn't be the end of the world. I could make myself some dinner, take a long bath, maybe go to bed a little early. It would be a treat. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Yep. In fact," she leaned to look around me at the parking lot on my other side. "I think I see Becky pulling up now." She waved at me. "So go on, get out of here." I had to admit she was right. I sighed and pushed myself off the building. "Okay, you got me. I'll go home. Let me just get my purse." Sammy patted my back as I walked past her. "You'll thank me for it tomorrow." I fished my Italian leather purse out of the cabinet where we kept our personal belongings while we were working and slid it onto my shoulder. My mother and grandmother had never cared much for fashion or labels, but they had instilled a firm belief in Italian leather in me. Shoes, bags, belts, wallets, all leather goods had to be imported from Italy. Nothing else was good enough. Even after all my years in New York, surrounded by devotees of French red-soled Louboutin, I still swore by Ferragamo, Prada, Gucci, and Bottega Veneta. I straightened a few boxes of supplies that weren't lined up properly on their shelves against the wall. Then I noticed that a couple of them were empty enough that their contents should be combined and the boxes thrown away, so I started cleaning them out. "What are you doing?" Sammy asked. "I'm just straightening things up a little bit. I don't want to leave everything all over the place for you to clean up tonight." I knew I was making excuses not to go home. "Things are not a mess. Those boxes are fine the way they are, and they're certainly not something you need to take care of now." Sammy took me by the shoulders and turned me toward the door that Becky was walking through. "Hi, Francesca," Becky said as she walked in. "Hi," I started. "Francesca was just leaving," Sammy said, cutting me off. "She guided me to the door and walked me outside. Go, we have everything under control. The cafe will still be here for you to fuss over in the morning." She released my shoulders, walked back to the door, and kicked out the doorstop. "Bye now." She waved. The door thunked closed. I sighed, staring at it for a minute. There was no way Sammy would let me back in today, even if I did own the place. And a long hot bath really did sound pretty good. I adjusted my purse on my shoulder and started on what I thought would be an uneventful walk home. Chapter 2. It wasn't a long walk, just a few blocks. My grandmother had never learned to drive, so when she and my grandfather decided their family needed more space than was available in the apartment above the cafe, they needed to look close by. The house they found was a Cape Cod that was old even when they bought it. It was nestled among other Cape Cods on a street 2 blocks over, and perpendicular to Main Street where the cafe was. The previous owners had adapted the house so it had 1 downstairs bedroom and 2 upstairs bedrooms, one for the boys and one for the girls, my grandparents thought. But no children came along, besides my mother, and the 3rd bedroom stayed empty until I moved into it as a child. I decided to take a shortcut across a few backyards, the same shortcut I used to take when I was a kid, running back and forth between the house and the cafe 10 times a day. I hadn't taken it since I'd been back because I'd still been wearing my New York stilettos, which weren't exactly suited to grassy wandering, but my aching feet had finally convinced me to dig some of my mother's loafers out of her closet. Fortunately, her obsession with Italian leather, combined with regular visits to Cape Bay's cobbler, meant that her nearly 20-year-old shoes were still in great shape and comfortable to boot. I turned off the sidewalk and stepped onto the grass. The shade from the trees was a nice break from the summer heat. With how humid Massachusetts summers could get, I had learned long ago to keep my thick mass of hair in a chignon pretty much the entire season. As a teenager, I had argued with my mother that black hair made me hotter in the summer sun, and I would be so much cooler if I could just dye it blonde. She refused, insisting it would turn orange. I didn't believe her and bleached it at a friend's house one summer day when I was avoiding working at the cafe. It turned orange, very, very orange. After that, I listened to my mother's beauty advice. I trekked across a few yards, reminiscing about my childhood adventures. As I got close to my house, I saw Mr. Cardosi, the town barber, sitting on his back porch. He had lived 2 doors down from my grandparents my entire life, and I had played and gone to school with his son Matteo, or Matty as I had always called him. It was unusual for Mr. Cardosi to be home at that time of day, but it was unusual for me to be home at that time of day, too. "Hello, Mr. Cardosi," I called, waving. Mr. Cardosi didn't move. I thought that was strange, but when he sat out back, he usually had his radio turned to the Red Sox game. So maybe he just couldn't hear me. I decided to wait until I was a little closer to call out again. I waved again as I got into his backyard. "How—" I stopped, noticing Mr. Cardosi's chin was resting on his chest. Was he sleeping? I cut across the yard to check on him. This had always been the kind of neighborhood where everybody watched out for everybody else. I appreciated it now, but I'd hated it when I was a kid and Matty and I were running around causing trouble. I'd never once made it home before the news of whatever mischief we'd gotten ourselves into had reached my grandmother's ears. I walked across the lawn, wondering if I should call out to Mr. Cardosi so as not to startle him, or stay quiet to let him keep sleeping. Not wanting to scare the old man and give him a heart attack, I called out again, "Mr. Cardosi? Mr. Cardosi!" He didn't move. I slowed down as I got to the porch. "Mr. Cardosi?" I said more quietly. Still nothing. I nudged his shoulder. "Mr. Cardosi." He slumped farther over, and I got a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. Mr. Cardosi wasn't asleep. He was dead. I backed away slowly, reaching for my phone and my purse so I could call for help. I lurked at a distance while I waited for the police and ambulance to arrive. I knew I couldn't leave, and really, I didn't want to just abandon poor Mr. Cardosi, but I didn't want to hover too closely either. I didn't know how he'd died, but I knew the police would want to look around, and I didn't want to mess with things. Besides, being so close to a dead body was a little unsettling. I wasn't too surprised that the police car arrived first. It's a small town, and the police station is just across the street from the café. The ambulances have to come all the way from the next town over. I heard the cruiser pull up, and I poked my head around the house and waved. The officer climbed out of the car and approached the house. He was a big, imposing man. Not overweight, just very tall and broad.
"You the one who requested police?"
he called when he spotted me. "Yup, that's me," I yelled. He strolled a little bit closer, then motioned me toward him.
"How about you come over this way for me?"
He sounded suspicious. His brow was furrowed as I walked toward him. He was clearly trying to figure out who I was and what I was doing there. While everyone pretty much knew everyone else in town during the off-season, the summer brought a lot of tourists, and the officer seemed to think I had wandered off the beach and into trouble. We recognized each other simultaneously. "Mike!" I exclaimed.
"Francesca!"
he said at the same time. He held out his arms, and I hurried to give him a hug. Mike was another former classmate of mine. It wasn't really surprising to run into him, but it was pleasant all the same. I hadn't seen him since I'd gotten back. He held me out at arm's length.
"You look great."
Then a shadow passed over his face. I knew he'd remembered why I'd moved back.
"I'm really sorry about your mom. She was such a great lady. Sandy and I would have come to the funeral, but we had booked a trip to Disney with the kids."
He seemed to realize how awkward it was to go from talking about my mother's death to his trip to Disney. He grimaced and looked at his shiny cop shoes. "It's fine, Mike, really. You have your life to live." Mike smiled, grateful for the out.
"So, I heard you're sticking around for a while."
"That's the plan. I was kind of in a rut in New York, and I figured coming home would be a good change of pace."
"That's great. That's really great. We're happy to have you back in town."
He chuckled.
"I'm sure you'll see it hasn't really changed all that much over the years."
I laughed with him. "I've noticed. It's like stepping right back into high school. All the old neighbors are living in the same places." All of a sudden, I remembered the neighbor who had prompted the call that had brought Mike out here. The look on Mike's face told me he had just remembered, too. He rubbed a hand back and forth across his high and tight hair.
"So, you were concerned about Mr. Cardosi?"
he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I was walking home, and I took the old shortcut through the back. When I was coming across the yard, I yelled to say hello, but he didn't move. So I went over to check on him, and, well," I gestured toward the back of the house.
"He's around back?"
Mike asked, starting in that direction. "On the patio." Mike took a wide path toward the back of the house. I guessed so he could get a good look before he got close. When he got to where he could see Mr. Cardosi sitting in his lawn chair, he held a hand out to me, motioning for me to stop. He glanced back.
"You check his pulse or anything?"
I shook my head. "No, I just nudged him and he kind of slumped." Mike nodded and continued across the back of the house toward Mr. Cardosi. He rested his right hand on his gun. A cop habit, I assumed.
"Mr. Cardosi?"
he called softly. He took a couple of steps closer.
"Mr. Cardosi?"
There was no movement in the lawn chair. Mike reached a hand toward Mr. Cardosi's neck and held it there for a moment, checking his pulse. He withdrew his hand and pushed the button on the walkie-talkie on his shoulder. He spoke quietly, but I could just hear,
"You can let the ambulance know there's no rush. He's gone."
Hearing that, I realized I'd been holding out some hope that Mr. Cardosi really was just sleeping very soundly, or maybe even had passed out. Not something I'd normally wish for, but given the options, I would have preferred it. Mike walked a wide circle around Mr. Cardosi's chair, leaning down to look from all angles. I wondered if that was standard procedure or if he'd seen something suspicious. I hadn't noticed anything, but I also hadn't lingered once I'd realized the situation. Mike walked back toward me with a grim expression. I felt tears unexpectedly fill my eyes. So much had happened in my life recently, and this was just one more thing on top of it all. Mike must have noticed my expression because he put his hand awkwardly on my shoulder.
I'm sorry, Francesca. I know you knew him well growing up.
I sniffled. It's not just that. Everything has changed so much lately. I covered my face with my hands. Sammy made me leave early today because she thought I needed a break, and now... I waved toward Mr. Cardosi. Mike patted my shoulder.
It's a lot.
He seemed very uncomfortable. I took a couple of deep breaths, then shook my shoulders. It was what I always did when I was trying to cheer myself up, literally shake the bad feelings off me. I wiped my eyes and forced a smile. Sorry about that. Just got a little overwhelmed there for a minute.
That's all right.
He seemed happier now that I had regained my composure.
Now, I know you told me you were taking a shortcut home. Is this a way you come often?
I shrugged. Kind of. I mean, it's the way I always walked to and from the cafe growing up, but I think I've only done it once or twice since I got back in town.
Uh-huh.
Mike reached in his breast pocket and pulled out a small notebook with a pencil through the spiral at the top.
And this is the time of day you usually come home?
No, I said. He must not have heard me say that Sammy had sent me home early. Usually I stay until close at 8, but today... I thought about telling him about Mrs. D'Angelo's visit, but decided against it. Today Sammy thought I should leave early and get some rest. I paused while he scribbled, then I thought of something. Wait, why? Did you see something? You don't think someone... Crime was virtually non-existent in Cape Bay, and murder was practically unheard of. Surely he didn't think someone had killed Mr. Cardosi. Mike looked up from his notebook and smiled at me.
Just trying to make sure I have all the details right for my report.
He resumed writing, looking at me again when he was finished.
Now, did you see anybody nearby? Anybody coming or going? Anything suspicious?
I shook my head. There were a couple of tourists out on the street when I left the cafe, but once I got on the side streets, I didn't see anyone. Mike grunted and wrote something else.
Sammy can confirm what time you left the cafe?
Yes, and Becky had just gotten there. Mike, you're not telling me something. You don't think I did something to him, do you? Mike smiled at me again. It wasn't the friendly smile from when he first recognized me. It was more of a cop placating a citizen smile.
No, I don't. I'm just establishing a timeline so they know what they're working with when they do the autopsy.
He waved toward Mr. Cardosi.
Case like this, no one around, no obvious cause of death. They always do an autopsy, just to figure out what happened.
I nodded. That sounded reasonable. Still, Mike's tone made me a little anxious, as if he wasn't quite telling me the whole truth.
Helps the family rest a little easier, too,
he said. The family? I remembered Matty. Poor Matty. His mother had died when we were kids, and now his dad was gone too. He'd be all alone in the world, like me. I brushed the thought away. This wasn't about me, and I'd already had my breakdown for the day. Do you know if anyone's called Matty? I asked.
No, they haven't, he replied quickly. Not unless one of the neighbors has seen my car out front and called him, which is actually pretty likely.
It was. In a neighborhood where everybody watches out for everybody else, something like a police car parked out front was unusual enough to raise interest. Should I call him? I reached for my phone that I'd shoved in my pocket. I'm not sure if I have his number. Do you have it? Mike held out a hand.
No. I'll call him in a bit. Just want to finish getting some things down.
He looked at his notepad.
When you left for work this morning, did you take the shortcut or go another way?
I sighed. All his questions about my day were a little frustrating. I took the main road, out the front down York Street, and out onto Main.
What time was that?
About 7.
And did you see Mr. Cardosi?
I sighed again. All I wanted to do was...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?